Trying to figure out the best time to get started in studying for the bar exam? Stick around, I've got the answer coming up in this video in just a moment. I'm Jackson Mumey, the owner and founder of Celebration Bar Review, and for the past 25 years I've helped thousands of bar takers, people just like you, to make their next bar exam the last bar exam. If you want to know more about how we do that, check out the links on this page after this video. Well, welcome to our series of 10 tips for ways that you can improve your bar exam scores so that you can make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Over these 10 short videos, what I want to do is give you some insight into 5 things that you can do as you're starting out with your studies, and 5 things to do after you get into your studies that can all help you improve your score. In my experience of teaching the bar for now over 25 years, I found that these 10 things are items that you can do that actually make a difference. So I hope you'll stick around and check all of them out and use them. Take advantage of each and every one of them. Item number 10 on our list, and we're going to go from 10 up to number 1 at the end, the one that I think is the most important: start early. Now, some of you might be watching this and thinking to yourselves that starting early means starting 3 years before the bar exam. I've certainly heard from people who contact me before they go to law school who want to start studying for the bar. I think that's a little too early. So what is the optimum time? When we talk about starting early, what do we really mean? Well, in my experience, 4 to 6 months is about the right period of time for most people when they're studying for the bar for a variety of reasons. One is that it allows you to keep your studies roughly at 10 to 15 hours per week, and in many cases even a little bit below that if you're starting just on the outside of 6 months. And the nice part is you don't have to study every day or every part of every day or every weekend day. You can even take off a week or two for holidays and special events. If you begin your bar studies with less than 4 months to go, for any of the jurisdictions that I would say most people are taking, the big ones like California, Florida, Texas, the UBE, which would include New York and New Jersey and DC and many other states, if you start with any of those in less than 4 months, you're probably looking at 30, 40 hours or more per week. Now, for some people, that's certainly manageable. For a graduating third-year law student who doesn't have anything else to do after their last class, well, they can certainly invest 40 to 60 hours a week in study. They won't enjoy it, but they can do it. On the other hand, the results for that kind of work tend to be not very productive. Current pass rates for the traditional approach to bar study have been less than 50% for first-time takers. So, in truth, if you talk to people who run the big box bar reviews, and that's how I'm going to refer to the traditional approach to bar throughout these lectures, the people in the big box bar reviews would tell you that the reason that they try to have students study for only 6 or 7 weeks is not because that's good teaching. It's certainly not. But because it's good economics for them. The classrooms are available, the professors are available, and it's certainly more cost efficient to put everyone in the room for a period of 6 weeks than it is to stretch it out over a much longer period of time. So it's good business, but it's not good learning. The difference is that good learning really requires more time to bring in information. Now, one of the things that we've learned over the years is that most people learn effectively by using a technique, a pedagogy, called spaced or stepped repetition. Now, when I use that term, what I'm talking about is the ability to repeat information rather than to memorize it or cram it. Spaced or stepped repetition is simply the introduction of material to a student, then it's set aside for a period of time. Then you are reintroduced to the same material, you repeat it, and you add a small new bit of information. Then you set it aside for a time, you come back to it, you repeat it again, and add a little bit of new information, and you continue on that way. So it's just like a series of stair steps going up. When you do that, what we found statistically is that there's a much higher retention of the material. This is also how humans are hardwired to learn. It is not by memorization, it's by repetition. And if you've ever been around small children, or maybe you've got some in your household, you know that I'm telling the truth. It's the repetition which sometimes drives you crazy. Well, actually, a lot of the time it drives you crazy. But it's by repetition that we learn. It's not by memorization. So when we take the cram part of the process out, When we give people enough time to study over that spaced or stepped repetition, we see a much greater success rate. And frankly, across the board in education today, spaced repetition is the preferred teaching method. So we think that it's definitely to your advantage to begin early so that you can take advantage of that approach. Now, there are a couple of other special cases where you might need even more than 4 to 6 months. If you're someone for whom English is not your first language, I would say in most cases you will definitely need more than 6 months to get ready. If you're a foreign trained attorney, you've never seen American law, and English is not your first language, you probably should count on 8 months to 12 months, so almost a full year ahead in order to prepare for the exam. In the same way, if you're someone at home that's got extraordinary circumstances, perhaps you have a lot of those small children I was talking about, or you have very little time because you are exceedingly busy at work, maybe you've got a great deal of responsibility at work, you might need more than 4 to 6 months. The point is that when you use the concept of home study, you have the ability of figuring out how long that period of time should be and then beginning to work through it, rather than being on someone else's time frame and time schedule as you might be in a traditional big box bar review. Now, there are inevitably those people that decide that they're going to take a bar exam only 1 or 2 months right before the test. In fact, I consistently get phone calls from people just a few weeks away from the bar exam who are determined to take our course and try and take the exam. Can it be done? Well, the answer is it can be done. You can get through the hours of lecture and the materials and the reading and the question practice. In our course, we think you need about 300 hours, 250 to 300 hours is the sweet spot to prepare. The problem is when you try to cram that into 4 or 5 weeks, you're not going to get as much value out of it as if you spread it out over time. I think that the best you can do in that situation is to simply touch on the highlights, and that's a very difficult way to go about the process. Some people obviously procrastinate just because it's not fun to study for the bar. Others wait because they think it'll somehow cost them less money. But the reality here is that cost is not a barrier, at least not in our course. And in reality, if you fail the bar exam and you have to wait 6 more months to move on with your life, that's probably lost capital, lost wages, lost earnings that far exceed the cost of starting and taking a bar exam early on. Now, there's very little in the way of empirical data to suggest that waiting until the last minute and trying to cram everything into your brain is a successful strategy. As I said, the pass rate for the courses that run 6-7 weeks tends to be under 50% across the country. In some big jurisdictions like California and Florida, it's actually as low as the mid-30 percentile. So it's not a great strategy. There are, of course, some other strategies out there. Some people suggest 3-day or 6-day seminars. I don't think anyone anymore would tell you that that's really all you need to do to get ready for the exam. The reality there is that even in those kinds of cram courses, you're told to do X number of questions a night before the cram course. It's not a particularly effective method, but the point is that even those who offer that kind of teaching and approach know that 3 days or 6 days simply isn't enough to take years of legal training and to get ready for a high-stakes exam like the bar. So, starting late is certainly a problem. Now, if you really are starting late, I think you ought to consider whether or not it would make more sense to defer to the next exam and get an early start on that. In general, we would say that that's a better strategy than beginning too late, failing, and then having that failure hanging around you like a heavy weight. Now, sometimes people say to me, well, Jackson, if 4 to 6 months is optimum, how much is too long? Well, in general, as I said, anything over a year is probably too long to study unless you've got an intervening circumstance. In other words, if you start your studies and you know that you've got a big trial coming up, or you're going to have a baby, or you're moving someplace where it would be difficult to study, perhaps you're being deployed in the military, those sorts of things would be interruptions that might make it worthwhile to start early, take a break, and then come back. But again, the time back optimally should still be 4 to 6 months before the bar exam. So that's the number that I'm going to continue to suggest. I do have people that come to me and say, I'm in my first or second year of law school. Can I start studying for the bar exam now? And the answer is yes, you certainly can, but you're probably better off to spend your time and energy focusing on your law school classes. Get those out of the way, and then if you want to begin your bar studies at the beginning of your third year or your final year of law school, whatever the year that is, that's a certainly acceptable way to do it. If you're in a correspondence law school or a state accredited law school and you know that the quality of the school that you're attending is not great, I would certainly recommend an early start to your bar studies. Even if your school is offering a bar review course as part of the school curriculum, it absolutely doesn't hurt to get started with a competent bar review course at the earliest possible moment. In any event, my experience has been that the earlier you start, up to a point, the better off you're going to be. And that point seems to be at about a year. Anyone that begins more than a year ahead of the exam, often they lose interest, they lose momentum, they lose their enthusiasm. But I've also noticed that the people that start earlier, somewhere between, let's say, a year and about 6 months or so, tend to be the people who are, how can I put this nicely? Yeah, I really can't. They're the ones that are pretty type A, and that's the best way I can put it, I think. They want to know everything, they want to do everything, they want to learn everything. I understand that. Often this sort of student will say to me at some point, the reason I started early is so that I can go through the entire course 2, 3, 4, 5 times. That's not necessary, at least not in our course, nor is it recommended. The idea, as you'll learn in our upcoming videos, is to narrow down what you learn as you get near the end to review the things you don't know. It's not to go back over everything you've learned as a survey time after time after time. We've discovered over 25 years that going through the entire course multiple times has very little benefit for most people. So by starting early, we don't mean starting early so that you can do everything multiple times, or starting early so that you can take 3 different bar review courses, or starting early so that you can memorize thousands of pages of written material. That is not our goal, and that's not the point. Starting early really mostly gets you into a routine, a pattern, into a study lifestyle that we want you to have. It lets you take the information, begin to build on it, put it in your brain, and then use it. And to use it in practical ways so that it becomes a habit. When we teach writing in our course, we teach a different way of writing, a new way of writing, as we'll talk about later in this series. And that takes more time and more effort, perhaps, to relearn what most people learn very badly in law school and is not valid for the purposes of the bar. So, by starting early, it gives you a chance to rebuild and relearn that set of skills. And of course, ordering early, I think, has the additional advantage of getting your material, getting it at the price now, rather than waiting as time goes on and potentially having to pay more for a course. And in our course, at least, we update our materials online so that if anything does change after you've enrolled, you're automatically updated and you don't have to worry about missing out on anything. I think that's, again, an advantage of a home study digital course versus having to sit in a classroom and worry about having outdated or old materials or books. So, my point is that when we talk about these ways to improve your bar scores, you can take a positive step right now by simply beginning your studies. If it's now less than 4 to 6 months from the upcoming bar exam, it's real easy. Decide how many hours you can invest in your study, make that a priority, and if it's manageable for you, get started, get underway now. And if that number of hours that it would take you to get 250 to 300 hours in between now and the exam, if that number of hours on a weekly basis is too large a number for you, then begin now for the bar exam after that so that you can get your studies and your hourly studies back down to a manageable number. In other words, whatever you're doing, get underway, get going, start early. It's one of the best ways that we've seen to improve your scores.